Good morning. My name is Matt Scherer. I'm with PMA Practice Transitions, and on the video podcast, I have Adam Goldsmith,
Morning.
John Dubos,
Good morning, everybody.
and Keith Nicholson.
Good morning and happy Friday.
Absolutely. And just so everyone knows, John is a dentist, and so is Keith. So our first topic this morning, we're going to talk about reasons why dentists should sell their practice. I think the biggest reason, well, let me back up a minute. I think what happens, at least the feeling is dentists do a lot of planning when they're going to purchase a practice, right? But when they go to sell their practice, they don't do quite as much planning, and we've seen that in the past. And maybe the John or Keith, you could talk to that somewhat, but at least that's the feeling we get. A lot of times, what happens is the reason why they're selling is they're tired. Practices, they're taking their foot off the gas a little bit. Practice is kind of dropping in revenues, and they're just tired of dealing with staff and all the stuff that goes along with owning a practice. I don't know if you guys, you know, that's the same experience you've had, or you guys have both, John and Keith, you've owned a practice and sold a practice, so.
Yeah, absolutely, Matt. I'd definitely like to talk to that point. I owned the practice for roughly 15 years, and I sold back in 2020 myself. And at the time, I was thinking, am I too young to do this? And but I wanted to have a plan in place, and just like you said, you don't when you go through school, they don't really teach you, number one, how to run a business or buy a business and then run it. And then you certainly don't know how to sell the business. So I think that's a great talking point. Um, and I guess when I look back to myself, was I ready? I was for a lot of reasons. And just like you said, tired, burned out. I went nonstop at 100 miles per hour for that time duration, and just it took a toll on me. And at one point, you have to just step back and say, am I doing any good for myself, the staff, the patients by running myself, into the ground? And the answer is no. So, I think oftentimes when we go to do the sale of the business, we have things that kind of like run through our minds, like, oh my gosh, am I going to abandon my patients, my staff? Am I going to let my family down by doing this? Things that go through your mind, and they did through mine. But I came to the realization that, I provided a lot of great years of service, and I still am, just in a different capacity now, and without the stress of owning the business and operating at the same time.
Did those thoughts, did you contemplate it a long time, or was it kind of something you woke up one morning and you were like, man, you know what? I'm kind of done with this, you know.
That's a great question. It was quite a long period of time. I
Was it?
actually almost sold in 2017, and it wasn't until 2020 that I finally pulled the trigger on it. And I think a lot of things were just playing on me, and a lot of what I mentioned prior. But it goes to show you that you better plan, because you think you're not ready, but when it comes time to be ready, it's not a very easy, quick decision to make. So I was able to contemplate over that 3-year period, had a lot of discussions with my wife, colleagues, and then I finally decided it was the right time.
And I think you hit on something there. Our big thing is, plan 3 to 5 years out. And there's a few reasons why you want to plan 3 to 5 years out from a banking standpoint, right? When a buyer looks at your office, when we appraise an office, we're looking at the last 3 years. So we always go through tax returns and look at, how much discretionary uh, items are you flowing through your practice, right? And that 3 years would give you a lot of enough time to kind of clean up some of those things, maybe get them out of the tax return so that way they're showing more cash and more profitability. Makes banks and buyers want to buy it a lot more. I don't know if you have anything to add there, Adam or Keith, but
Yeah, I was gonna obviously great insights, and I think my experience going through practice sale, I owned a practice for about 10 years in a partnership with 4 locations, and I think my process was a little bit more of an aberration. It was driven by some personal decisions to relocate closer to family now that kids were in the equation. So it really, having gone through it in more of a compressed timetable, it really did illustrate the value in preparing. Obviously, if you have a horizon of 3 years, just as you described, that kind of matches what, most of the financials that are going to be reviewed when you're doing evaluation. So I think it would be extremely valuable to, kind of have that runway and sort of make some strategic decisions that will better prepare you for, the transition, but also just to make a practice more attractive to buyers. And I think John highlighted several things. Again, my situation was a bit unique. I think for a lot of sellers, I think often they may have an epiphany one day. It may be more of a gradual thing, but I think there's many contributions to that decision. And sometimes it can be, there's a lot of rapid innovation, exciting things that are changing in dentistry. And we feel it's incumbent on us to keep pace with that. And maybe sometimes people just realize they are sort of don't have the, energy or drive to kind of sustain that pace. And then that's when they recognize it might be the appropriate time to transition. It doesn't mean they're at the end of their career, but just may not be on board for, kind of continuously innovating and implementing new things. Other times it can be a product of just all the different responsibilities you have. As you are well aware, and John can speak to this personally, you're not only the clinician, you're wearing many hats, the HR manager, just in charge or responsible for obviously making sure you adhere to all the different regulations. And so I think sometimes people realize their enjoyment may be derived from the clinical part where their core competency is, and they're ready to unload some of those other responsibilities. But I think the more reflection and self-awareness you have, and the better you're able to think about that in advance, it's just going to pay dividends in terms of the outcome you get with, selling your practice, whether it be the actual sales price or just finding the right buyer. John alluded to, I think many of us lament the idea of our patients transitioning to a new provider and the uncertainty with that. But if you have some advance notice and opportunity to meet with prospective buyers and select the right candidate, then I think that just assuages those concerns and makes for a very smooth, successful transition.
Yeah, good points, good insight. The last thing we want to have dentists do is sell the practice because they have to, right? And we've seen that too many times. Either A, they hang on too long, B, they've got some type of ailment that's all of a sudden popped up, and now it's, now I have to sell it, and the planning kind of went out the door. And I don't want to call it, I wouldn't call it necessarily a fire sale on some of those types of scenarios, but certainly, you don't, the more desperate you are, the less value you're going to get for your practice.
Yeah, and if I may chime in just quickly, go to Matt's point about where we use the last 3 years financials for our appraisals, and the murkier those numbers are, it is a turnoff to buyers, in a lot of respects. Our job is to show where the cash flow is in the practice, and if there's a lot of discretionary expenses that are sucking up some of that income, we have to uncover that. And so taking that 3-year runway to clean up your books and we're not the IRS, so we're not telling you how to run your practice, but it certainly makes it more marketable when the books are cleaner, and it makes banks, they favor obviously cleaner numbers as well.
Adam, would you mind, just for discussion's sake, giving us a couple of examples of what these discretionary items are that we should look for?
we've in our experience, and I'm sure Matt has seen a lot more than I have, but we've seen a lot of personal expenses run through the business, and we've seen home, lawn care, credit cards,
Okay.
clothing stores,
Yeah.
a lot of different things that, probably are, it's a gray area whether or not they are actual operating expenses. Even family sometimes family members are paid through the practice who may or may not be
Right.
an integral part. And so obviously we need to go back through those numbers and say, okay, are these integral or are these operational in nature, or is this extra cash a buyer would have to do with what they would choose? And so I think, again, taking the time to kind of clean up the books just makes it easier for buyers to discern, okay, what cash is actually going to be available to me if I were to purchase this practice, so forth.
Yeah. I think one other thing we see too, that is a detriment to a practice is when the doctor is getting close to retirement. They know they're getting close to retirement, and everybody, and I get it, they take their foot off the gas, right?
Right.
They're not doing, obviously, they're generally not doing any marketing. They may have cut down a day a week in clinical days. So what happens is revenues start to decline, but the overhead stays the same. So what that does is then affects the net profitability of the practice. So at one time, maybe they weren't overstaffed, but maybe today, because they've cut back quite a bit, and I have this scenario, the overhead didn't change, and now it went from 47% profitability down to 37% profitability. And
Right.
that's going to greatly affect, obviously the value.
I think that's a great point. And I think that's the beauty of having a plan. If you want to go
Yeah.
3 years out, 2 or 3 years out, whatever, that's your indication to say, I've got to keep on the gas pedal and keep things rolling the way they were and get those things cleaned up. And it's plenty of time to do it.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's all the time we have for it. Adam, I don't know if you wanted to add one more point there.
Sorry. Yeah. Aside from the health reasons, a lot of dentists just simply are burned out and they want to spend more time with family. I think that's when you start sensing that, I think it's time to start getting a plan together.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that's all the time we have. Keep on the lookout for some more topics. We're going to be releasing or having more topics, I guess, and talking about different things in the dental industry going forward. So look out for our future videos.
Thank you.
Thank you.